Welcome to Humble Beginnings, a podcast where we uncover the unconventional, more relatable paths to success. In this show, we'll share the stories before the C-suites, board memberships, and appointments, the stories of various upbringings, first jobs, career pivots, educational uncertainties, and more. This is the place to hear about their lives from the GovCon executives themselves. We hope you enjoy. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Humble Beginnings. I'm your host, Amanda Ziede, and our guest today is Michael Jung, Executive Director of ICF's Climate Center. Thank you for being here today, Michael.
Amanda, I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad that you guys are doing this because I'm a big believer that the who and the why matters every bit as much as the what and the how.
Absolutely. We do too. I'm very excited to be speaking with you today and get a little bit more about your background. So to start, Michael, I understand that you were born in Korea and your parents are Korean. And while you came to the States around 3 years old, I understand there's a bit of a origin story around what drove your parents to come to the States. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it goes all the way back to the Korean War. My father was a young boy hiding out in a cave. When the shooting stopped and the smoke cleared, the first person that he ever met was an American GI who came into the cave, saw that my dad was suffering from a terrible ear infection. He gave him a shot of penicillin and probably saved his life, and also gave him a piece of chocolate, which also instilled a great fondness for chocolate that I've inherited from him. And it also imbued on him this impression that this medic was a black man, and the first American he ever met was black. The first American he ever met gave him medicine, and he saw that America was a place that did a lot of good. So he found an opportunity. The Great Society that was passed in the 1960s by LBJ created an unprecedented demand for medicine in America, much like the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law are creating, this unprecedented demand for clean energy and infrastructure. So there was this delta. My father was fortunate to, do well enough to escape the fate of being a farmer that had always preceded, everyone in his line of the family. He made it out and became a physician. And then he came to the United States because America needed doctors. And here I am today. I'm very lucky that he took that huge leap of faith. I love immigrant, stories because every time I feel intimidated by a decision or unsure of what opportunity to pursue, I just think back and, realize that my parents had to make the ultimate leap of faith, to pick up and leave everything that was familiar to pursue a better life for their children.
Yeah, absolutely. How old was your dad when he met the American GI?
I think he was like maybe 5 or 6.
Wow.
And so it was like, at that age, those are like some of your first big searing memories. He remembers a chocolate more than the shot.
That's crazy. Thank you for sharing. So when your family decided to move to the States, you were 3 years old, correct?
Correct. My first memories are in the States, actually. We landed in Rochester, New York. My first memories are of this like blizzard. I think it was like of 1977 or something, where the National Guard had to like airlift food into our apartment complex. We had to dig tunnels to get out of the doors. We actually had to climb out of the windows and dig tunnels to open the doors because the snow had fully socked in the first floors.
Wow.
And my folks said, "That's crazy. Let's get out of here." So they moved down to Houston, Texas, where we enjoyed life until like the hurricane of '83 or something blew the roof off of our garage. And we ended up in Kentucky. In a certain sense, we were climate refugees early on.
Wow. Yeah, that's my family immigrated to this country as well, and they also landed in upstate New York. Unfortunately, they didn't take us somewhere warmer before that, but that's crazy that you've experienced such extreme weather changes that have caused your family to move around the state so early on.
Well, maybe subconsciously, the fact that I was a climate refugee as a young child and then ended up in coal country in Appalachia, Kentucky, might have imprinted my fate as an energy and climate professional and crusader.
Yeah, I'm seeing the full circle here already. So yeah, we'll get to that. But I did want to ask about, what brought your family to, coal country, Kentucky, and what was it like growing up there?
Why? Does it not seem like an obvious choice, Amanda, for, Korean immigrants to end up in Kentucky? The truth of the matter is that it reminded my father a lot of what he remembered from what is the equivalent of Appalachian Korea. It's mountainous, it's rural, and it's also the kind of place where people leave their garage doors open at night. They leave their doors unlocked during the day. Everyone knows everyone, and it's a place where it's intimate in that sense as a community. And looking back, I've often been asked, "Gosh, it must have been rough growing up as an immigrant or Korean in Kentucky." And for me, it felt like the safest of places because once I got past, the very shallow, biases or whatever that people might have had. For example, everyone assumed I knew kung fu, and I didn't. I'm a Korean, so I knew Tae Kwon Do. They didn't know the difference, but I did. And once we got past that, they looked at me and they're like, "Okay, I guess you're just like us in every other way," because that's the only, prejudice that we have, the only stereotype that we can conjure up. So I very much enjoyed growing up there. But ultimately, I chose to pursue schooling up the East Coast. But I would always say, on breaks, I'm going back to my old Kentucky home.
Yeah, I can relate in many ways. My father also grew up in war in Lebanon, and I think the suburbs in the Northeast were a safe haven. It must have felt so different than the way he grew up. So, what was it like? What would your parents I don't know, instill in you growing up, or maybe perhaps how did you grow up differently with their mindset, the way that they grew up, the things that your parents have experienced once they came to America in Kentucky?
Well, like you, Amanda, I imagine that, we both probably grew up with a sense of, maybe responsibility is too heavy a word, but knowing that our parents came here, made a very, tough choice and took a big leap of faith in order to build a better life for us and create new opportunities for us. I always felt this obligation to explore those opportunities, to fulfill those opportunities. So I got into everything. I couldn't just sit on the couch all day. My parents made a big choice to come here. I needed to do something with myself, and I'm a curious mind, so I always enjoyed learning, whether it was a sport or a hobby or schoolwork or nose in a book kind of a thing. Those were the kind of values. Looking back, the only thing I'd change about it is at that time, I think my parents and many others in that generation didn't realize that kids could grow up speaking more than one language. So I had to teach myself Korean, learn Korean as an adult, which that was fun too. But gosh, I could have gotten it for free if they'd only known better. But hindsight's always 2020.
Yep, I can completely relate to that as well. I do not know how to read and write Arabic. It is something that I wish my parents taught us growing up too, but I think it was more so, going to school and fitting in where you
Yeah,
are.
it's not too late, Amanda. I
But
just hit the 1,000-day mark on Duolingo with my language instruction, so it's not too late.
all right. So, Michael, let's talk about your educational journey for a bit. You were born in Korea, you grew up in Kentucky and found your way to Yale. We know Yale is not an easy college to get into. So, what took you to Yale? What was that process like?
It's a funny story, which goes all the way back to the fact that I grew up in a neighborhood in Kentucky where there was only one other kid, and we were the default playmates because there was no one else to play with. And he told me one day, he was kind of a troublemaker. He said, I'm getting sent off to boarding school," which for him meant a disciplinary kind of military academy. But my first thought was, "You are not leaving me in this neighborhood all by myself." And so I applied to boarding schools too. And I ended up getting into a place called Exeter Academy, which is in New Hampshire. And I applied to all the same schools he did, plus some others. He applied to all the same schools I did, plus some others. We didn't get into a single school that overlapped. So next thing I knew, I was unpacking in New Hampshire, and Exeter is a fantastic place to get a great education, and it really kind of set me on a path to attend all the other schools I did afterwards. Yale, I really liked because it was the kind of school where once you got there, you rarely heard the word Yale. There was this lack of self-awareness. It was just, once you've gotten there, okay, let's do what we want to do, build what we want to build, and create our community. You just went to the bookstore. You just went to the cafe. You didn't go to the Yale bookstore or the Yale cafe. That self-deprecation I found refreshing.
So, you studied environmental studies, correct?
I took the approach of taking all the classes that looked interesting my freshman and sophomore year, which included film studies and fractal geometry, et cetera, et cetera. And I ended up at the end of sophomore year looking at the major requirements and trying to figure out what could I possibly complete now that I've pursued my interests. And it ended up being environmental studies and East Asian studies. So I did double major.
So you mentioned, we kind of can see where your interest or curiosity in climate started. What else drove this passion for you?
Amanda, it goes down to being a Boy Scout. That was one of the things that I got into as a kid in Kentucky. And one of the mantras in Boy Scouting is, you got to leave the campsite cleaner than it was when you got there. And I guess I've just scaled that up. I feel this responsibility that this campsite of planet Earth, I've got to do my part to clean it up and leave it better than it was when I got here. It's a lot of work to do because we're making an awful mess out of it. But there's work to be done, and I'm not going to sit on the couch while that's happening.
Awesome. Yeah, you mentioned Boy Scouts, and I did promise that we'd come back to this. So, and this is coming from your bio. I know you're an Eagle Scout. You're a Fulbright Fellow. You mentioned Tae Kwon Do. You're a black belt. And this is a humble brag, but I am too. So another relatable note. You're a former competitive ballroom dancer, professional ski instructor, ping pong entrepreneur, tennis player, backpacker, all of these extracurricular things that, first of all, you have the time to do, but also excel at. You also mentioned you learned Korean as an adult and you're studying many languages. So where does that drive come from to not only be involved in so many activities, but to also really do them full on?
If I could wave my magic wand, I would add more hours to the day. And I'm a big believer that it's not a matter of finding the time, it's a matter of creating that time. And there's always time to be created. I probably drive the rest of my family crazy, but I'm a restless soul, and I'm always kind of needing some stimulation, some challenge, some new objective or goal. And just like Tae Kwon Do, Amanda, there's a discipline that you can develop early that carries you through into a lot of other areas. The discipline that it takes to get to a black belt in Tae Kwon Do is discipline that translates into the work life, into everything else that you pursue. And so I imagine that getting started on the right foot with a hobby early on, and I've got kids, trying to instill that sense of discipline is something that I think is really important.
Yeah, I agree. In hindsight, I do. I didn't love karate and Taekwondo growing up, but I completely appreciate what it taught me and the perspective I have now. So I understand it as an adult. As a kid, it was a little tough, but yeah, absolutely. Okay, so tracking back to Yale for a bit, you graduated, like you said, double major. What was your first job out of college?
My first job out of college, I don't know if you call it a job officially. I guess it is a job. I earned a Fulbright Fellowship, and I was sent to Korea. That's where I learned my Korean, or relearned my Korean. I think I probably still spoke better at 3 than I do now, but at least I can get by and not get too lost. And while I was in Korea, I took up English language teaching part-time as part of my responsibility as a Fulbright Fellow. So I have there's a generation of middle school boys that I taught Korean to. They are now young men, I guess. And most of them at the time learned this very particular script. They memorized it. It was, hello, how are you? My name is, and I thought I would get a little creative with that. So if you meet a young Korean fellow who comes from, the central part of South Korea, who for the late 1990s audience, people who remember the late 1990s in your audience might remember the Budweiser Light campaign, which was "What's up." Yeah. I taught them that, so that's the irreverent side of me poking through.
That's really funny. It's cool though that you were able to kind of go back to your roots after college. It's it's not every day that you're given that opportunity. So
that said, I should go back. My first real job that I think of as my first job, I was not paid in dollars. I was paid in cookies because I was a tour guide at my high school. It was a boarding school, and I was a tour guide, and when you did a tour, you got paid in cookies. And so, and the cookies were delicious. I'll tell you, the admissions director, his wife, I think, baked them every day, and they were in a jar, and it was well worth the time spent to earn a cookie.
That's hilarious.
But I think of that still as kind of what I do today. To be a tour guide is to help other people understand something, see themselves in something, connect to a place or an issue or a cause. And that's, I'm kind of a tour guide for climate and energy. And I wish someone would give me more cookies for it.
Me too. I think we should get paid in cookies a little bit more
Well,
often. I
why
think that's
not?
right. Good
There must be some
point.
IRS rule that makes that hard.
Yeah, this is a call to action to all of our our audience. So talk a bit about your career progression afterwards, and ultimately, I know this is a loaded question, but what led you to ICF? What were some of those crucial turning points, perhaps moments that ultimately defined your career journey?
Yeah, there's kind of two pivotal moments that I'll share with you, Amanda. The first is ICF. Working at ICF was the first job that I ever really, really wanted, but it was the one that got away because ICF was involved very early on in the founding days of what we call Energy Star today. It evolved out of green lights, and I had an opportunity to work on it, in its very early days. But I couldn't take it because it would have required me moving to Washington, D.C., away from Columbus, Ohio, where my then girlfriend, now wife, was studying to enter medical school. And it wasn't in me to, cut and run and go do my thing while she was about to enter a very challenging chapter of her life. So I thought, well, I should probably do the right thing and stick around, be here to support her. So I took a job with a utility, which at the time seemed like a distant second choice, but in retrospect was a fantastic way to learn an industry, a sector, a worldview that has really enabled me to make a difference. So I joined American Electric Power, AEP, same letters. EPA was the agency I would have worked on at ICF. So I joined AEP, and I spent almost a decade with them, which was really great because I got to clean up one of the dirtiest utilities in the country at the time. And now they're really close to the front of the pack when it comes to being ambitious on doing the right thing. The second one that I'll share with you was when I left AEP. I actually had a chance to brief an incoming CEO on climate change issues because that was my portfolio. And I got on his calendar. I scheduled this briefing. I thought I'm gonna get this guy going in the right direction from the get-go. I showed up and he looked at his calendar and he said, "Climate change? Oh, I've already been briefed." And I thought, but this is your first week at the company. Who got to you before me? Who else works on this, besides me that would have gotten to you? And he said, "Oh no, it was Jim." Jim who? Jim Inhofe, the senator? Oh yeah, he called me up. We talked. I'm all set on climate. And I thought, my God, I've been outmaneuvered by a U.S. senator on climate change issues with the CEO of one of the largest utilities in the country. I was disappointed, and I said, "Well, I guess I'll give you back your time." And he said, "No, let's talk." And for some reason, he wanted to chat, and we ended up having a really nice conversation. Maybe he just wanted to unwind a little bit after the intense first week on the job or something. And I asked him, tell me about a leap of faith that you've taken in your career. And he said, "You know what? I was a CEO of a small natural gas company, and I left that industry. I left that company to become, a vice president at an electric utility. And everyone thought I was crazy. Here I was, the top dog, and now I'm going to be second fiddle." But he said, "I knew that I needed to work on something bigger. I knew I needed a bigger pond. I knew I wanted a new challenge. And so I took that leap of faith, and it's worked out." And at my next annual job review a few weeks later, I did the same thing. I turned in my notice, and I went to go work on a gubernatorial campaign because I knew I was ready for something new, ready for something bigger, and I wanted to try something challenging.
And how was that experience?
Working on a gubernatorial campaign really opened my eyes to what I think is kind of the terrible analogy. Wartime footing is what I wanted to say, and I can't think of a better way to say it. But this terrible sense of urgency, this idea that there is a huge deadline, there's going to be a very objective result against which you're measured. And you've got to do everything you can every single day to get to where you've won. And a campaign is kind of the perfect way to have that sort of urgency, that way to know if you've done enough. And that is something that's really I think of as the way to work. Working in the utility sector, there is kind of the opposite of the sense of urgency. The job is to keep things the same. And in a campaign, your job is to, ignite and change. And so I really enjoyed working in that campaign. It led to a career in the clean tech sector, which is, a bunch of startups. Startups are basically campaigns. And I really was enlightened to this way of working. And everyone has a job description, but you actually, at the end of every day, it's all hands on deck all the time, which I find fun. It's kind of like how movies work. Movies are a bunch of talent that come together. They do a film. In the campaign world, you've got election day. In the movie world, you've got release day. You have box office figures. You have election results. And then after a time, everyone kind of disbands eventually. But people find each other again because it's kind of this like big bang, everything explodes and then everything comes back together. People, keep in touch, especially the ones that are good at what they do, and you can find them to work on the next project with you at some point.
That's an interesting analogy. I've never thought about it like that. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So how did the one that got away eventually, come back? How did you land?
Yes. It all, like many career moments, it's happenstance, really. I was visiting a friend. He lives in Hawaii. I was at a conference there, and I caught up with him. I said, let's hang out. He said, "Oh yeah, join us. We're going to take a walk on the beach as a family. We're going to meet with some friends. Come join us." And I did, and I met someone who I realized we went to college together. She was a few years behind me. Played the name game. Turns out that she's married to a guy who was in the Yale Russian chorus, which I led for several years when I was an undergrad.
Of course.
And so I was like, that small world, and you get to talking to people. But what do you work on? Oh, I work on climate. Oh, what do you do on climate? Because I'm in energy. She says, oh, I work at this place called ICF. Interesting. And she said, by the way, would you know anyone who might be interested in leading a climate center at ICF? And one thing led to another. I guess I pulled a bit of a Dick Cheney move and said, yeah, I think I do. But it ends up being the right opportunity because I was ready for, the biggest lever. I'm always looking for a bigger lever to pull, a bigger way to make a change. And ICF is kind of the ultimate force multiplier. We help governments, we help, businesses, we help nonprofits really with, answering the questions that they can't solve themselves. And it's a tremendous opportunity to do some good for a company that is arguably, one of the largest and certainly one of the oldest climate consultancies in the world. The one that got away.
Yeah, right. You're back. And, I know that prior to joining ICF this time around, you would have been stationed in the DC area, but you're actually in Oregon, in Portland right now. So why is this location important and meaningful to you and your family?
It's going to sound shallow, but it's absolutely true. My wife grew up watching a lot of Grizzly Adams and had this mental image of like living in a log cabin in the woods somewhere. And when she finished her medical training, we had a chance to kind of pick a place and then build our lives. So we checked out the Northwest, and we don't live in a log cabin, but it certainly is the kind of place that fits the mental imagery. The mountains beckon every day. The coast is not too far away. And it's really a delightful place. I can hike a different trail every weekend and never do the same one twice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's, in terms of climate change, environmental studies, your love for the outdoors, your passion for cleaning up and leaving places the way you left them. I'm curious what your hopes are for your aspirations and your position for climate change, or maybe the difference that you hope that you can make in your position.
Well, I don't know that I'll be able to make the difference that I think needs to be made in my lifetime. But the best I think I can hope for is to build the foundation upon which others will add. Ideally, I work myself out of this job, and before I retire, I'm like, okay, there's no more climate work to do. We're done. Nothing to see here, folks. But I think we all recognize that that's not going to be the case. The momentum behind climate change is, too strong to stop at this point. We've really got a lot of work ahead of us. That said, I am a big believer that human ingenuity is our greatest resource. We can really, everyone does projections. ICF does a lot of projections, but almost always those projections involve extrapolating from what is already known. And if in my, the remainder of my career, we can invent, we can innovate, and we can create new solutions that can scale quickly enough to make what looks like a really heavy and hard lift much more manageable and quick, we will have done ourselves a tremendous service. So I'm very interested in, making sure that innovation, that the ground is fertile for that kind of innovation.
Absolutely. Well, Michael, you've clearly had a bit of an unpredictable path in a career journey to where you are today. And I think humble beginnings can mean a lot of things. Obviously, it's where we come from, the way we grew up. But in my opinion, it's also in your perspective, in your purpose, your values, which also speak to, who we are and where we came from. So thank you so much for sharing yours with us. And to end, I love to ask if there's any advice or words of wisdom that you would tell young adults about finding their way or, finding their passion.
It's a good question, Amanda. You and I, as children of immigrants, I think might, often think about that sort of leap of faith that our parents took. I often think about that in terms of, with my own, career. When something feels scary, when something feels like, gosh, I don't know about this. I think about, the fact that our parents made harder choices, took bigger leaps of faith, and it requires leaps of faith to move forward. If you're staying still, that means you're getting behind. And so I would urge, especially folks who are entering into their careers in the climate and energy space, to really, try to regularly leave your comfort zone. Get into meetings where you don't know what's going on. You're having to learn a new set of jargon. You're having to, acquire a new set of knowledge, because that's when you're growing. That's when you're learning. And this is a field where, things are moving fast. They have to move fast if we're going to save ourselves. So, challenge yourself. Take those leaps of faith. Don't be scared. Or it's okay to be scared, I guess.
But do it anyways.
Yeah. Being scared means that you're at that boundary of your comfort zone and the learning zone.
Awesome. Well, those are wonderful notes to end on. Michael, thank you so much for sharing your background, your journey with us, and your perspective. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Humble Beginnings. Check out WashingtonExec.com to find more of our podcasts and profiles on executives. See you next time.